What's up, everybody? I'm George Kors. Let's talk about Das Schloss, The Castle by Franz Kafka. Let's do a deep dive here today, folks. Uh, Obviously, super famous novel, The Castle. I think a lot of folks are going to have heard of this. It was just included in the Spiegel 100 books out of 100 years list. I just did a video on that. It is down below, so you can check out that list if you want to check out like more German literature and what the Spiegel is thinking, or some other great novels originally written in the German language. This copy of the castle I got in Portland, Oregon. I got it at Powell's City of Books. Famous Powell's, love Powell's, great bookstore. Got this in their used stacks. So let's dive in. Kafka was one of the first sort of literary giants that I was introduced to as a teen when I was a student at the Gottfried Arnold Gymnasium in Pelleberg, which is in Brandenburg. I don't know if you know where Pelleberg is. It's a small town, so good on you. Comment if you know where Pelleberg is. That's super cool. And it follows Kay, who is a surveyor who arrives in this village with this looming castle, and he is attempting to do his work and live there. But it is much more complicated than that. And this, in the Ankunft section, this is one of my favorite beginnings to a novel. I'll just read a few lines. Es war spät abends, als K. ankam. Das Dorf lag in tiefem Schnee. Vom Schlossberg war nichts zu sehen. Nebel und Finsternis umgaben ihn. Auch nicht der schwächste Lichtschein deutete das große Schloss an. Wow, great stuff. Immediately, Kay is isolated. He can't see the castle for the fog and the darkness. And he is just alone on this journey. And as the reader, we sort of go on this journey with Kay. And I think the first bit is a pretty slow burn with this novel, in my opinion, because you just are immediately immersed in the sort of bureaucracy of the castle and the sort of bureaucracy of the village. And that just sort of washes over the reader in a way that, Kay feels very isolated, so you feel very isolated as the reader. And I think what is really interesting, right off the bat, is how immediately scary the castle is as a symbol. I think the castle as a symbol is totally well done and well fleshed out. And it makes a lot of sense. And thinking about that Spiegel list, when Max Brod was publishing, Kafka's work, the Spiegel could have chosen a lot of different works there. They could have chosen America. They had short story collections on the list. They could have chosen the short stories, and they didn't. And I think one reason is Der Prozess, the trial, and Das Schloss, the castle, are often talked about sort of together. And I think a lot of it is, just the similar, bizarre and almost totalitarian bureaucratic vibes that you're getting from these novels. So if you have read The Trial, if you enjoyed The Trial, The Castle would be another great read for you, because I think maybe even more so than The Trial, this sort of looming power is really present throughout this piece. In The Trial, we have so much the unknown. Joseph K. doesn't know why he was arrested. He thinks he must be, somebody must have slandered him, right? In here, we have a really unknowable force in the castle. And it does really feed into that isolation that Kay feels here. And I will say this: it is not as if Kay, who's a land surveyor, arrives in this snowy village and is unable to work, doesn't even know where to sleep. It is not as if he does not, work at finding a way, or even at acclimating himself in the village regardless of being able to work. Um, we have this huge cast of characters that Kay interacts with: Barnabas, Frieda, Die Wirten, Klam. And with Frieda, for example, Kay has a relationship with Frieda. It is, um, they are sort of like engaged. So he maybe has this like sexual relationship with Frieda. And he's also just sort of engaging person after person with, okay, how can I get, into the castle? Who can I talk to? And he does have somebody in the castle that he is supposed to talk to, Klam, who is another sort of overarching figure, who seems like deeply inapproachable throughout the novel as well. And I think a lot of these folks contribute to this feeling of isolation that permeates throughout the novel. And if that is something that you're sort of interested in, this novel is definitely for you, because I think from page one on, you're feeling this feeling that's lurking always just over Kay's shoulder of what is going on in terms of him not being welcome here, not understanding the conventions, culture, power of the village, of the castle, and just not even being able to make that great of progress. Because it shouldn't necessarily be controversial to have a surveyor come and work in your village, but boy, is it. And I think that symbol of the castle is really fantastic throughout. I think going into this idea of isolation, I think there are two major sort of thematic takeaways that feeling of isolation sort of gets me to. One, which I think Max Brod really read into when he was publishing Kafka's work after Kafka's death, is the idea of like the spiritual journey for salvation. And you can see that here. You can see that there are a lot of parallels to sort of that religious mindset where Kay knows who he needs to talk to. He knows what he needs to do. He attempts to do it. He tries to faithfully do that. And it is fruitless. It doesn't work out. It's not something that is even remotely possible at times within the novel to achieve. And I think that sort of spiritual journey, I think that could speak to a lot of people, because Kay would be seen as, if we're reading this sort of religiously, Kay would be seen as somebody who's questioning the faith. He doesn't even know really why it's happening in the way that it's happening. It's happening, meaning his treatment, and he doesn't even know how his treatment could possibly be changed. So that is definitely something that I think is a really really eye-opening viewpoint, one that Max Brod really embraced. The other one is also, I think, a little bit more literal, which is his engagement with bureaucracy and power. And I think that reading is especially, I think, salient for contemporary readers. Because in the intervening century, the systems of power and the way that they're executed have not necessarily changed all that much. And folks are going to get into the comments and be like, okay, well, what about the gigantic war that happened in Europe? And yes, you're right. However, these bureaucracies and the way that bureaucracies are executed, those have continued on in one form or another. And that, I think, especially for folks in the United States, our bureaucracies are largely the same. There have been significant changes, of course, but, we have the same systems of governance. And because of that, and because, even after in the reconstruction of Europe and post-Second World War, we see very similar bureaucracies being set up in terms of the republics and the countries that were created, and also Soviet bloc. We see these ideas of governance executed in a different form, but we have very similar results. And what I think is really important for readers of Kafka is just that feeling of the bureaucracy being, unattainable, and really being, just absolutely all-knowing in some ways. And I think that is really important. So I think that is something to think about when you're getting in here is, who has the power in the bureaucracy, who gets to talk to who. A lot of this is really important stuff. And going sort of off of that, I think if you're a person in the United States, if you've worked for any level of government in the United States, state, federal, or local, I think this novel would really strike a chord with you. And I also think that if you work for a large corporation, this novel might press some buttons, because I think that sort of almost unknowable power that's exerted, we do this because we do this, sort of logic permeates this novel in a big way. And Klom is, Klom, this representative of the castle who's supposed to be liaising with Kay, is a great representation of that. Klom, sort of another superficial reading here, Klom is sort of the HR representative, this sort of evil HR representative. You could almost see him in this sort of capacity that we might more contemporarily see. Because, the way that Klom interacts, the way that, Kay gets these letters from Klom, it's looming with a capital L, and something is up. Something is definitely awry. And I think, that a lot of this in those first 200 pages is really, really clear, and it becomes really, really evident to me when we go through a section from 210 in this edition. Now this isn't translated, from 210 onto 280, where Olga is explaining her family's history. And Olga, another sort of villager character who is present here, her family are sort of outcasts in the village, and Olga sets about explaining to Kay why that is, their interactions with the castle, their own issues, and it gives a lot of sort of the history of the village, and it's really grounding for the reader at that point, because you get these 200 pages where Kay is trying everything. He's got this relationship with Frida, he's talking to, various business people, various teachers from the school and folks. He's trying to get with Klom, and everything is fruitless. The journey to salvation is unrealized. And talking to Olga and realizing the sort of tradition that's going on here of the bureaucracy, that's really important to me. It's important to me as a reader because, first and foremost, I see the castle here as a big commentary, as an early commentary on totalitarianism. The castle's power, and just the reading of power, who gets to have power, who gets to exert power, who gets to speak with whom. These are really questions that I think can background for us a discussion of the totalitarian states that rose throughout Europe, shortly after the publication of this novel. And, it is those same bureaucratic structures that led to the totalitarian states. And we possess similar bureaucratic structures still to this day, even if we don't live in a totalitarian structure. And that's sort of a contradiction that we have to live with in terms of how governance is executed, right? That's something that we have to deal with. And I think Kafka was reading between the lines of, governance and corporations and governments in Europe at the time, and was able to really articulate a very elegant rise to totalitarianism of the castle. It's all-knowing, all-controlling. The people fear it. It has significant power over culture, over literally almost everything in their lives, much like a totalitarian state would. And I think that is a major takeaway that I have. The discussions of bureaucracy and, spiritual salvation aside, this as a book about the totalitarian state is really evocative to me. I think that's really, really interesting in terms of there's a lot to unpack there with how K interacts with it. And that there are points in here that do remind me of another novel. I need to pull it off the shelf. Hold on one second. Grossman. And, this novel here was not published initially in Soviet Russia. It was suppressed, and the manuscript was sent elsewhere. And I am going to do a video on this, but that is Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. Robert Chandler does an excellent translation here. Here we see a major criticism of the Soviet totalitarian state, and I do think going through this, this is a very intentional comparison of the totalitarian state of Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany, and I'm hearing echoes of the castle in Life and Fate in a major way, because the way that Kay attempts in good faith to interact with the bureaucracy and is essentially cast aside every single time, it's difficult. And I will even say you do see Kay get arrogant, get upset, get angry. And that is all sort of a big part of what I think is going on here. That is really, really important. Another sort of thing that I would think, a more contemporary reading that I'm thinking of the castle, that I thought of sort of time and time again, especially because Kay does try to acclimate himself in the village in some major ways, is I thought about this as sort of a migration and immigration story. Kay comes to the village, doesn't know the culture, is, here seeking work, here seeking to live his life. And no matter what he does, no matter how he acts, no matter how he comports himself, he is cast aside. And this othering, this sort of systematic othering, I think can be representative or mimetic of immigration stories that we see, because immigration stories that we see contemporarily. Because right now we are in an era where xenophobic rhetoric is very popular in the United States. It's very popular throughout Europe. And that, I think, the way that folks talk about Kay, the way that Kay, gets responses from people about the castle, I think that there's a significant reading here, and sort of the parallels between, contemporary migration and the sort of isolation and othering that you systematically encounter, and how that is articulated by Kafka here. A big reading there. There's a ton I think that you could go into, because I think that is sort of a liminal space. Kay is in this liminal space. He knows he's supposed to be here, but he knows he's not supposed to be here. He knows he could do work on behalf of the castle as a surveyor. He knows the castle does not want him to do work. Why? It's not necessarily articulated, right? And that sort of gray area, that liminal space, is one that I think is, in terms of our contemporary discussions of intercultural interaction, could be a very fruitful reading of this novel, because it's just so close. Much like the Salvation reading, it is so close and yet so far at the same time, and these contradictions build up throughout Kay's time in the village. Of I feel like Kay could get there, but I know that he can't. And that's a very difficult, almost like pataphysical type, contradiction that's happening. Both are true at the same time. And that brings me to one of my first suggested readings from this novel, which is Homi Bhabha, The Location of Culture. And in this, I think Homi Bhabha is talking about othering and social liminal spaces in a really, really fantastic and important way. I think that The Location of Culture, the essays in here, without a doubt, I think articulate for me those feelings of not knowing where one is. And a lot of what Homi Bhabha is dealing with here, in terms of culture, I think the discussion on stereotype and the discussion on the other and civility are all fantastic here. And I think that there could be a major reading of Kafka that explores it from the sort of post-colonial lens that somebody like Homi Bhabha was dealing with. So that is definitely one of my first recommendations right off the bat. Is because, no matter the reading that you're going to have here, no matter what your major takeaways are, K is floating through a really strange liminal space. And is he welcome? Well, by Frida, yes. But by Kalam, no. And there's this sort of back and forth that K experiences with person after person, all while this castle looms sort of in the fog and darkness, sort of unattainable and unreachable. And I think that everything that's going on there, that is really, really an important part of it, is just not knowing who gets to have what say. And that liminal space is throughout the novel, throughout the course of the plot, throughout the course of Kay's journey. Everything is sort of up in the air. And, even after we get towards the end here, one of the things that's unique about this novel is that in its current state, which this is the Originalfassung, the novel's unfinished. So we don't necessarily, as readers, get to know where Kay's journey takes him. And that, I think, for some readers might be a little upsetting. And here's the last page of this. You see that sentence there, aber was sie sagte, the sentence is incomplete. And, this is not necessarily something, some sort of like James Joyce type situation. That this is because, the novel itself was not completed by Kafka. And in 1926, in the 20s and the 30s, when Max Brod was publishing a lot of these works, he did take significant editorial sort of power in how he chose to edit some of these works. And that is, I think, a really big part of reading Kafka, and an important part of reading Kafka is understanding that these works are not finished. And I can't speak to the translation of this. I know that there have been multiple translations, but as you're picking up your Kafka translations, it is important for you to consider which translation you get, because if the translation is based, for example, off of the 1926 version that Max Brod published of this, it is going to be different than a translation that is based off of the Originalfassung because of Max Brod's editorial decisions that he made. Now, there's an ethical discussion here about should Max Brod have published Kafka's work, because very famously Kafka wanted to have his work destroyed upon his death. And I think that I can see this being read in multiple ways. I'm very thankful for Max Brod keeping and retaining the manuscripts that he did and publishing them, because obviously we get these fantastic works. But it is something that as readers we need to critically engage. When we're thinking about Kay arriving in this village, arriving in this sort of possibly totalitarian state, possibly having, not possibly, certainly having this otherhood status, we can separate that out from the artist. But what's unique about Kafka is that folks are reading his letters, his diaries, and getting very personal with Kafka, all presumably against his will. And that in and of itself has sort of a totalitarian, we're going to take what we take from you regardless of how you feel about it, sort of mindset to it. And that, I think, made my reading particularly interesting here. Not that I read biographically. I people like autobiographical fiction, and of course there are autobiographical readings of any novel. Any novel is very personal. Even your genre work. You're going to find very very personal stuff in there. But I tend not to read autobiographically. But in the context here of reading The Castle, having the feeling of Kay just not knowing what to do, and that deeply personal exposure to his othering, did make me think back to our man Franz Kafka himself, and how he might have felt about just how deeply we delve into his journals, for example, his letters. I mean, I know I see a lot of people reading Kafka's letters right now. They were, recently translated into the English. And I think that is an important just part for us to acknowledge as we deal with Kafka, is how fraught getting these novels has been. Kafka not having a lot of success publishing during his lifetime, dying young, his friend not destroying his work, but instead taking significant, at times, editorial power and publishing it. And then later, Kafka's work being republished in these Originalfassung versions that is meant to be more in tune with how the novel was structured in his journals, for example. This is like a convoluted and complex journey just for us to read about Kay not being able to work as a surveyor in this village, right? I think that the journey that Kafka's work has taken to get to us is legendary in literature, and I think it is one that is important to recognize. How it got here. And if you've read those journals, or if you've read those letters, you might understand, just how complicated Kafka's mental health was, and just how complicated his relationships were with his father, for example, or with others, and just how he felt as a person. And I think that perhaps shines through in all of his work, obviously, but in The Castle, it definitely is shining through in a big way. I think, overall, this, as an unfinished novel, does read complete. And I think when saying, oh, the work is unfinished, might dissuade some folks from reading it, because they might say, oh, well, we don't know what happens. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, because I think the status of the novel is unfinished, and not knowing necessarily what happens with Kay in The Castle is actually very artful. It's very artful in the sense that if we are reading The Castle as a totalitarian power, we might never know in real life how a totalitarian state dealt with a certain person. Records might be destroyed. Records might not even be made necessarily. The totalitarian state can exert its power in myriad ways, and that is important for us to recognize. And I think the novel being unfinished is I think, to its benefit, because I think it leaves us with Kay permanently being in this liminal space and not resolving in a tidy fashion what's going on with him. And I think that is an important lesson for us to take about dealing with these overwhelming bureaucratic structures, dealing with a totalitarian state, or even dealing with our own emotional, spiritual journeys. Regardless of what a person's religion is, we might not have a fulfilled or fulfilling emotional, spiritual journey with regards to everything in our lives. And that is okay. This is a learning situation that I think is really important for us, which is that some things there may not be an answer to. And to me, that was the most important thing that I got from this in reading this. And if you look at the table of contents here in the back, one of the things I love is that the chapters have titles, and then we start to degrade, and we don't have titles at the end. And that lack of titles at the end was almost like a primer for me as a reader to leave Kay where he is, sort of trapped in this almost otherworldly village with this bizarre bureaucracy and castle. And I think that is really it's sad. It's difficult to deal with. It's very emotional, but it's also very poignant, and I think it's very beautiful. And I think it really does is a really you know, albeit unintentional from Kafka's point of view, but a really really important sort of statement there. And I think, going forward with that, I think that has shifted my appreciation of Kafka. I've read The Trial a few times. This was my first time reading The Castle, and I've read The Trial a few times, and I did think, The Trial, in and of itself, felt a little bit more complete, because you'll notice here in The Trial that it does have complete chapter titles and everything, and it has a chapter called Ende, the end, and that to me did feel somewhat complete, because and even the sentence there is complete at the end, and that is a different vibe than we are getting from The Castle. The Castle has that incomplete feeling, and you'll have to, if you have read this in translation, I want you to comment below which translation you've read and whether or not the last sentence is complete in your translation, or if it is a complete sentence, or if it is not, if it is a fragment. Because I am very curious, because this really, reading this more so for me than Der Prozess, let me feel that Kafka's work was incomplete, that Kafka's work was left unfinished and still merits that reading nonetheless. And I think that in terms of the literary history of things, I think that is really important to me, for Kafka as a person, because it is a really complicated history, and there is a ton going on there. So yeah, comment down below if you've read this in English, if you've read this in French or something like that. Let me know which translation you read and whether or not the final sentence here is complete. Because I really think that does inform our reading of it, and it being incomplete, really to me, was beautiful. I know folks might disagree with that, but I really did thought it was beautiful. I do think it is nice to acknowledge the unfinished status of this. And as a reader, I think it's also important. It made me feel a little bit more questioning myself as a reader as to whether or not what I'm doing here is ethical by reading Kafka in the first place. Because, obviously Max Brod went against his wishes, and it really made me think deeply about whether or not I should be reading this in the first place. And that brings me to something that I also want to talk to outside of The Castle. Let me know down in the comments below if you think you're going to read The Castle, if this is one of your next reads. But I have some more stuff I want to talk about with regards to Kafka, and specifically with this whole, I keep saying this, the Originalfassung, the original edition stuff that's going on here. Because every time I have a book, here we have Erschien der Roman erstmals in der Fassung der Handschrift, the original. Here we go. And I've got the Kafka stories. And here, dieser Taschenbuchausgabe liegt die kritische Kafka-Ausgabe zugrunde. Dieses editorische Unternehmen löst die Max Brod seit 1926 herausgegebene Nachlassedition ab und ermöglicht die Lektüre dieses Werkes in seiner ursprünglichen Gestalt, in its original form. It's also S. Fischer Verlag. And this is a book. This is from the same series of Kafka's collected works from S. Fischer Verlag that I bought 20 years ago in Berlin. When I was in Berlin for the Grüne Woche, I went to Dussmann, which is such a cool bookstore in Berlin if you're there. And I bought this copy, Das Ehepaar und andere Schriften aus dem Nachlass. And I had bought it, I'd read Kafka short stories recently, and was poking my way through The Trial for the first time. And I picked this up at Dussmann for the train ride home. And one thing that really drove home for me at that time that Kafka's work was really incomplete was just how fragmented these editions are. And I want to show you folks a page here. Let me select a good one. Because we have just fragment after fragment after fragment in this edition. And, the edition, it is based on, how things were appearing in the journals. And I know, his letters are also available. And, time and time again, throughout this edition, you're seeing these fragments. And that, to me, is really fascinating. Around that same time, I remember folks publishing the Journal of Kurt Cobain. And I think, to start for me, there is like some major ethical concerns and questions that I have as a reader when I came across this. And as a teenager who was keeping a journal at the time, I was sort of like, wait a minute, what if somebody was reading my journals? And I sort of had that moment of, how would I feel if I was in that situation where, I was reading? Because in this edition, it is just it is just focused on the novel. But with the fragments, you get so many little asides in those fragments that might even be more personal. That might even be more relevant. Maybe I don't know. That's a difficult way to phrase it, but relevant in a different way to Kafka's life. And reading this really was eye-opening for me and started doing a lot of thinking for me, especially because that Kurt Cobain journal was published around the same time. I thought it was really very interesting to see folks do that. And there's definitely some sort of, ethical considerations that we might think is a good thing for us to do as readers delving into it. And I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from reading any of those texts. In fact, dive in. I don't want to prevent anybody from accessing most art or any art. But it is good for us to sometimes reflect as we're getting into it. Where did this come from? A librarian might say, or an archivist might say, what is its provenance? Where is the journey that this piece took to get to here in your hands? And I think that's important for readers of Kafka to recognize. If you're reading his letters and you think that they're really beautiful and they speak to you on an emotional level, I think you should also be thinking about, how did that letter get into your hands? How did it get there in the first place? Because Kafka didn't want it there, and was pretty explicit about that. And that's something that, we all as readers of Kafka need to consider is, what are we doing morally and ethically in terms of consuming this work? Definitely a big deal. The other thing that I think is important, and I think I want to sort of drive this home for readers of the Castle, as I'm recommending this, and maybe if you read the trial as well, because I they are interrelated in terms of their themes, is thinking about the translation that you get. I mentioned this earlier, but if you are going out and you're getting a copy of The Castle, you need to see who translated it and when. Is it based off the Max Brod edition, or is it based off of the critical edition, what they're trying to be the original, truest to Kafka's text? Because I do think that even though the readings might be slightly different, they are two different readings, and that is important. And I'm going to do a video later about translation that talks about why we should read in translation more and how we might think about translations. But in this case, the source material is different. So being able to access that source material is really important to a translation. And it's something that you might want to think about as you're picking something up. Maybe you go to the used bookstore, you find an older copy of The Castle. Well, you might, if you want to read something that's closest to be the translation to what Kafka wrote, in his papers, then the Max Brod edition may not necessarily be your cup of tea, but you might take what you can get, right? So that is something that's important for us to think about here, is looking at those editions of Kafka, seeing, especially if you're reading it in English or French or, Arabic or whatever, you need to decide, where does that come from, and how has it been translated? Because with a person like Kafka is very important. This novel has gone through such a journey, even just to get to you, right? To get into my hands right now to talk about it here, is quite the journey. Any novel goes on a significant journey, of course. That goes without saying. However, this journey here is unique, and that is something that we can recognize as readers, and also as readers of translation, we might want to delve into a little bit more deeply. So if you're looking for a place to maybe sort of get more into translation and translation commentary, I think that if you're reading Kafka, probably something to think about there. I don't have many recommendations of Kafka because I've never read Kafka in translation. So if you know of good translations or translations that you like, drop a comment down below. Let us know what you think the good translations are. And if you've read a Max Brod translation into English, maybe comment how well you liked that. I could see folks saying, hey, Max Brod took these editorial decisions. Well, editors make those decisions all the time. And a manuscript goes, if you, like me, have published a novel before, a manuscript goes from the draft that the novelist has, and the editors do significant work on changing it. That is the case of a lot of work, especially contemporarily published work in the United States. If you're being published by one of the bigger houses, your work might go through significant changes. So the argument might be there that Max Brod was just doing the process that we do, and that's totally fine for you. I think I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. What do you feel is the proper version to read? Because I think that it's a critical thinking task that might be important to how it informs you. So yeah, let me know how you folks feel about that. All of these copies that I have from S. Fischer Verlag, they are all the Originalfassung, so they're all from this critical edition that tries to get as close as possible to Kafka's original text. And I definitely would be interested to see, I might actually go out and find a Max Brod edition of The Castle, because I want to see how it ends and the editorial decisions that he took in publishing the work initially in the 1920s. So I definitely think that there's a lot going on there. That is an important part of reading a book like The Castle. That's not necessarily plot, not even necessarily themes, but there's sort of extra sort of cultural stuff going in here. And we haven't even talked about, Kafka's status as a Jew, Max Brod's status as a Jew, and in that period of, enormous uproar and genocide for the Jewish populations of Europe. I think that there's definitely a ton to unpack here with that. And I haven't even talked about that. There's so much there that we could get into. So tons and tons of stuff here. I think, just like we were talking about with Girl, One, Other or 2666, there's so much that you can get into with these novels. And I think The Castle is obviously no exception. Been around, beloved for a long time. And let me know if you're going to read it. Let me know if you're excited to read The Castle, because I do think it is a really provocative book, and I think it's definitely one that folks would definitely enjoy. And I have a couple recommendations that might actually be a little out there. With regards to based off of reading something like Kafka if you liked it. And I'm going to get to those in a second. There's one last thing with regards to the translation that I want to comment on, which is also an issue with the Max Brod edition, which is that Kafka has really unique punctuation and grammar at times. And, I'm a slow German reader. It takes me a while to warm up to reading Kafka, and it is very different than other German writers. And that is something that I'm really interested in seeing executed in translation. and seeing how translators deal with that. It's definitely something, if you know an English or so translation of this novel, I would love to see a comment down below of how you felt about the punctuation and the grammar, and if you notice anything like that, because Kafka's style is really unique. When you're reading the original German, it is like, that is Kafka's voice, very distinct. So that is something, and I've read that as well about certain Russian writers, Dostoevsky in particular. But getting on to the recommendations that I have a couple that I think are really excellent books that really captured these feelings of liminal space and isolation and paranoia to a certain extent. And the first one I have, both of them are really short novels. The first one I have is Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. And Season of Migration to the North, this is one of my favorite novels I've ever read. This is a really, really just unbelievably important novel. Dennis Johnson Davies does such a great translation here. And essentially what happens is the narrator of the story spends a lot of time in Europe, and then returns home to the Sudan, and is in that culturally hybrid space that somebody like Homi Bhabha is going to talk a lot about, in the location of culture, and in that cultural hybrid space is in that sort of liminal, where does this person belong space. And that, to me, is really, really provocative. I love this novel. I am going to do a video on this novel for sure. But if you are a lover of Kafka, I do think this is a great novel to delve into. Man, I cannot recommend this novel enough. I'm excited to do a video on it. Because he returns home expecting to feel at home and doesn't. And I think those same feelings sort of translate well from Kafka. So if you read The Castle and Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih, really, really, really fantastic stuff. One of my favorite novels ever. Second one, also a really great novel, I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. And this is also another very good translation. And this is a little it's a little on the sci-fi side of things. The premise here is this woman who escapes this bizarre prison in this world where all women and all men are imprisoned, and the guards one day disappear, and she and her fellow prisoners are able to escape, and they stumble upon prison after prison after prison. And in terms of those feelings of isolation, the journey to salvation that's never fulfilled, I Who Have Never Known Men, man, this is right up there in terms of that sort of unfulfilled journey. And it is really beautiful as well. I'm going to do a video on this as well. This was just I really enjoyed this, and I need to go through and take notes on this one. The translation by Rob Schwartz was very good. I thought this was very good as well. So I think both of these really excellent novels to think about. If you really dig The Castle, you really liked it, and you want to dig in, these two novels are well worth your time. And I think Kafka resonates with us for a lot of reasons. Just how raw a lot of the letters and journals and stories can be, is really important. And I haven't said the word, but for a long time everybody loved calling things Kafka-esque. And it is because there is that distinct feeling throughout his work that I do believe really does translate well still to this day. And I think reading it in the original German, I think does, you get Kafka's voice so significantly. And I definitely think that is something that a really excellent translator can do well. has captured the voice of the original. So, really do comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about, those translations that you've read, and list which one that you read, who the translator was, because I definitely would be interested in knowing more about that and how you feel Kafka's voice was captured. Because I don't think, I think we inhabit liminal spaces every day. This is something that's ubiquitous to the human experience. And, as we're traveling on our own emotional journeys through time and space, I do think it is really good to read novels like this that do sort of difficultly approach our own position, and let us sort of safely feel those feelings of isolation, that Kay is experiencing here. I think the overwhelming thing is, Kay is just trying, and no matter what, the effort is not necessarily worth his while. Well, maybe it's worth his while. I don't know. That's difficult to say, but the effort is not resulting in what he wants it to result in. These Kafka works are a really safe place for us to explore those complicated emotions of, well, what do I do? How do I feel if I don't fit in? How do I feel if no matter what, this goes unfulfilled, this particular task of fitting in with the culture or trying to do your work or whatever. I think that's really deeply, deeply complicated stuff that everybody has to deal with. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kafka remains as popular as he is. And I would really encourage everybody, in leaving here, just to think about, the ethics of reading Kafka. I want you to read Kafka. I want you to dig into those letters. And I do want you to think about, the ethics of it. If you were exchanging letters with your loved ones or lovers, and, would you, maybe not in the moment, Kafka's obviously, not with us and wasn't with us when these things were published. To what extent does privacy extend there? And to what extent should Max Brod have acknowledged and accepted Kafka's desire to not have his work published but have it destroyed? A question for the ages. One to which there might not be, just one answer, but many, many answers. So definitely interested in hearing your folks' thoughts about that. Thank you, everyone, as always, for watching and listening in. Really appreciate the time that you took today to be here with me. Please like and subscribe. I'm new to YouTube, but I love doing these videos. I want to keep doing them. You can learn more about me as an author at georgekors.com. That's where I have information about all sorts of stuff. All of my work, including my novel, Always the Wanderer. And you can follow me on Instagram at gbk7288. Thank you again so much, everybody, for watching and listening. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you folks later. Adios. Bye-bye.